Okay.
So I guess we're now recording.
Yes.
Okay, maybe we'll start a couple minutes early. Um, this is Adam, what is it, Engst?
Angst. Yes.
Angst, Engst. And Adam's with us today to cover the iPad and all of your questions. And Adam is the publisher of Tidbits, which is the oldest and most respected internet-based newsletter. Also, he publishes books that we talk about quite often, Take Control books that we encourage you to purchase on many of the subjects that we cover. And so we're really honored to have you with us. And we have somebody that would like to say hello to you. Ruth, we have Karen's mother, Ruth Anderson.
Hello, Ruth.
So anyway,
You can give me all the dirt on Karen later.
all right. So why don't we get going here?
Okay. So how do you want to do this? I obviously have a list of questions that you folks submitted, and I can just sort of work through those, or I can, if you want to actually, sort of ask them, and we can go back and forth a bit as need be. Whatever works the
Right.
best for you.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm sure we'll have some questions during the meeting that I didn't receive before the meeting, and there might be some other issues that come up. Are you going to use your
Okay.
iPad at all to?
Well, try. I mean, it may be a little hard to actually see anything. As you can tell, it looks like to me like it's a little blown out on your screen.
Okay.
So we'll see what it can do, but uh, hopefully, yeah. Showing iPads is actually one of the slightly trickier things to do with these remote presentations right now, because all you really can do at the moment is kind of hold it up to the screen. Um, Might be an interesting feature for Apple to add in a future version of iOS or the various apps, where you can actually do a full remote presentation on the iPad, going back and forth between your video from the front camera and what's showing on the screen. Haven't seen anything like that yet, but who knows? Maybe there's an app for that.
Right. Right. Okay.
So, okay,
Why don't you just start wherever you feel comfortable?
okay. Well, for lack of a better place to start, I will start at the top of the document that you sent. So Marcia Marsiglio asks, is there any way to delete incorrect email addresses that come up in a new email message when you begin typing? And these are email addresses that go with people who are not in your contacts list. Um, And what I wanted to just check on, I'm not sure if Marcia is there or not, but when you say incorrect email addresses, I mean, I assume you're talking about ones that show up when you start typing and you get the autocomplete list that pops down. And so these aren't
Yes.
incorrect, meaning they're really wrong. They're just ones you don't want.
Right.
Okay. Unfortunately, the answer is no. There's no way to get rid of those. What mail is doing is it's picking up addresses from received mail and sent mail, and saying, you've forgotten mail from this person once in the past. You've sent them mail. You might want to send them mail again, and so I'm going to give you them as an option when you start typing, because certainly one of the big limitations of the iPad that most people have run into is that typing on the screen is not so easy. And so anything Apple can do to reduce the amount of typing you need to do is generally considered to be a good thing. Um, in Apple Mail in macOS 10, there are ways of editing that list. It's called the received list, and we have a book that talks about that for Apple Mail in Lion, or in Snow Leopard, not updated for Lion yet. And but unfortunately, in iOS, as far as I know, there is no way to edit that received list. Apple doesn't give you that level of control in iOS. So does that answer the question?
Yes, I
Any
think so.
any follow-ups there?
Does anybody have a question on the question? I think that's okay.
Okay, good. Um, so let's see. And then the next, actually, I'm going to try to bring something up on my iPad here. I can't show you much of this, but I can get you a little bit of it. Um, come on, Apple. One of the, realized I didn't have a couple of the books on my iPad that I wanted to show you. So the next question is, when an attachment, this comes from Kathy Robbins, when an attachment is downloaded, which can't be opened for some reason, such as a PowerPoint file if you don't have Keynote, where does it end up? Is it still taking up space in memory? And if so, how can it be purged? Um, the good news there is that it's not actually downloaded, and it's not taking up any space, so you don't have to worry about it. That what pretty much everything on the iPad is using is what's called IMAP. And IMAP is an email technology, stands for Interactive Message Access Protocol, that all your mail lives kind of up in the cloud on the server and is only brought down to the iPad or the computer when you actually need it. Now, this is a really good way to do things for devices like the iPad, which they're pretty much always connected, and so mostly it needs to bring down the last few messages and make them available, and it's not trying to keep vast amounts of stuff locally. It's just saying, I'll show you what you need, and then purge all the rest of the stuff out. So so I wouldn't, don't stress too much about even if it does download something to be able to make it available for opening offline, it's going to get rid of it on its own when it purges the cache to bring in new messages. So that is, however, one thing I did want to say is that it's pretty common for you to get attachments in email that you can't open in the iPad because there isn't an associated application. And there's not much to do about that. The big limitation right now is zip files. So if you get an archive that contains other files inside it, you'll need to find an application that can open those and then help you extract what's inside. So, for instance, if you got a zipped Word file or a zipped PDF file, you'd need an application that could open the zip file and then an app that could open the Word file. So there's a couple of those out there. Actually, probably there's tons of those out there. The one that shows up on my iPad whenever I run into this is something called Cloud Readers, which is one of those apps that can open a whole bunch of different types of kind of ebook and document formats. Okay, any other questions about email attachments while we're on that topic?
Yeah, yes, we do. Don?
Yeah, follow up. Suppose you click to download something and then it didn't open. Does it still not stay on your device?
It's not going to stay no matter what. One of one of the frustrating things about iOS for those of us who are used to computers is that there's no file system. And so you can't control anything beyond what the app shows you. And so if you don't see, an option there, Apple's basically saying, you don't need to manage this yourself. We'll do it for you. And so, um, I mean, if basically I'm trying to go look, see if I've got a message in mail here that is going to show me. Oh, shoot, wrong iPad. We have too many of these iPads around. It can be confusing as to which one does what sometimes. We unfortunately have to have one of each around for various different testing and other purposes. Let's see. Okay, here's you don't want to see
How
that.
many iPads do you have?
Um, four. We have two of the iPad 1, the original iPads, because back when that one first came out, we got the right away we signed up to get one as soon as possible, but the 3G one wasn't available for a month or so after that. And my wife Tanya was writing a book, which is now morphed into Take Control of Your iPad, which I'll show you later. And so we needed to know what the 3G one looked and worked like. Plus, we discovered um, what we do a lot of is writing about things and testing stuff. And the iPad is not all that easily shared between people. So, I'd be trying to figure out how our website looked on the iPad or something like that while Tanya was writing her book, and I'd have to constantly go down and borrow the iPad and, interrupt her. And so it turned out that it was necessary for us to have two iPads kind of right away. And then, of course, when the iPad 2 came out, we got one of those. And then when the third generation iPad came out, we got one of those. So, it's definitely one of those situations where uh, we have a somewhat embarrassment of riches on these things now. Um, and what's a little too bad in some ways is that these are pictures or not. Is that we don't actually use them in probably the ways that you do because we're much more interested in what sort of how things work as much as possible behind the scenes, how to explain them, and so we don't actually have time to just sit down and read a book or watch a video or browse the web sometimes on the iPad. I'm not finding a good example of an attachment here that I can show you. Let's see. Oh, here, maybe this one will work. The problem is, um, okay. So yeah, so well, that was pretty quick. Yeah, honestly, I would have to say that you shouldn't worry about it. What the Mail app will be doing at any given time is kind of up to it. And so it may be caching in some cases and it may not be in others. And it's probably one of those things where Apple is actually even doing more behind the scenes work to say, okay, you've got a lot of disk space. We can afford to keep this big attachment for a little while. And then later on, okay, the space available is dropping. Let's expire all that stuff out. One of the things that developers have run into with the iPad again is that the Apple wants iOS to do a lot of that kind of management. That you can run into situations where um, as a developer, for instance, you don't get to say when your app is launched and quit. The user does. And so the app has to be ready to come back at all times and be just where the user left it, no matter what has happened. And so that's very different than the way macOS 10 has been. So again, the operating system doing a lot more for you so that you don't have to. And attachments are one of those things. Okay, while we're on the topic of email, this is someone who from Michaela has a question. I get my email from AOL. I can save it easily on my Dell computer, but I don't know how to save it on the iPad. And that one I need a little bit more context. Hopefully, if Michaela is there, I'm not sure quite what save means in this context. What are you looking to do with it?
Saving it so that next month, if I wanted to look at it again, it's in my saved mail. So if I'm saving things on the Cinque Terre, this.
Quite here, sorry.
Come on up.
I'm saving, somebody writes something about the Cinque Terre or France, and I want to save it for future reference. And so I have, on my Windows, I have saved mail. So I can go into saved mail, bring up Cinque Terre, and then find out what that writer was saying.
Okay, I see what you're looking at. So basically, um, um, let me also done. See if I can show you this. Okay. So remember what I said earlier about how mail on the iPad is usually IMAP, and I believe AOL would be in this category. So all of your mail lives up on the AOL servers, and it's always going to be there. And when you bring it down to your iPad to look at it, you're just bringing down a copy, and the real message is still staying up on the server. But one of the advantages of that is that that mail will not go away unless you do something like delete a message. And so if you want to save something for future reference, really all you need to do most of the time is just move it into a mailbox where you can find it easily. So I can show you, let's see, put this in um, landscape mode. Hopefully this will show up here. Um, if you see on the, is that showing up there for you at all? On the,
Yes, yes, we're fine.
here's on this side, that's a list of my mailboxes. And I have created those on the server. I don't believe you can create, let's see, edit. Yes, if you when you're looking at that list, it's hard to say. When you're looking at this list up here, there's an edit button, and when you tap that, you can tap new mailbox at the bottom, and so that would allow you to make a mailbox. And once you've got a message in there, um, you can tap over here um, to be able to move. It says tap on a mailbox to move this message. I could move this mailbox into any one of those particular mailboxes. So it's a way of taking your messages and saying, okay, here it is in my inbox. I'm going to move it over to a saved mail, or maybe you'd have a mailbox for a particular project, and be able to do that way. And so you're not actually still keeping it on the iPad. You're moving it up here in the server from the inbox on the server over to the saved mail mailbox on the server as well, which you can still see on your iPad. That makes sense? Sort of. The getting used to, particularly for those of us again who've been doing this for a long time, getting used to um, dealing with where this data is can sometimes be tricky, because it used to be back in the old days that you would have your mail server and you would download the mail to your computer and it would be deleted from the mail server. It would be gone. And that's a system called POP, or Post Office Protocol. With IMAP, it always stays in the cloud, and you just kind of get looking at it from your computer or from your iPad. And so you really need to you need to understand that so you know where that mail lives. And it's in some ways most obvious if you use a service like Gmail, or AOL I think has this as well, if you use a web interface, because the web interface is pretty clearly looking at the stuff up on the server. It's more confusing when you've got a computer or an iPad and you sort of remember that you used to download all your mail and then it would only be there. But in an IMAP-based situation, it's always going to be on the server primarily and only secondarily on your computer or iPad. Now we actually, let me see if I can show you. I can't, obviously, you can't actually read it, obviously. Whoops, too many iPads. Um, we have a book that I would strongly encourage you to look at. Um, and oh, it hasn't synced. Darn it. Maybe it's synced over here. Um, it's called "Take Control of Mail." On your it's all of them. Take control of mail on the iPad, iPhone, and iPod Touch. And let me force a sync here. I'll show you in a minute. I copied it over, but it hadn't synced yet. And basically, that book, written by a guy named Joe Kissel, who may have talked to you at some point in the past, I don't know, Joe talks to a lot of user groups, is a really, really good resource for anything about mail on these devices. That it gives you all the background about IMAP and all that, shows you how to set up accounts, work with mailboxes, and work with a lot of these kind of attachments, troubleshooting, anything you might be wondering about. Frankly, that book is going to have the answer to. Um, the I can't recommend Joe's stuff highly enough, because there's a reason why he's by far our best-selling author. He just does wonderful work and provides all that kinds of information. Okay,
We
any
have a
more
question.
specifically? Yeah.
A follow-up to that. If you have created one of these mailboxes on the server,
Yes.
but you're working on a computer, not an iPad, how do you see that server-based mailbox?
So the question is, if you've got a a mailbox up on your server in your IMAP account, and you want to see it on your computer as well as on your iPad, the answer is if you have an IMAP account set up in Apple Mail, for instance, or Outlook, or another IMAP capable client, it will just show up. It's just magic. That basically the IMAP server, when your Apple Mail client goes up and says to the to the IMAP server, "Hey, what's new? Got any new mail for me?" It will say, "Yeah, I got this new mail, and oh, by the way, there's this new mailbox too, and here's what's in it." And so one of the beauties of IMAP is that everything just appears the same way in all places. This is one of the big problems with POP, honestly, is that you would have a computer at work and a computer at home, and if you read your mail from from your computer at home, it would disappear, so you wouldn't be able to see it on your computer at work. And the beauty of IMAP is the same stuff appears in all places because it's really always up on your server.
Let me follow up on that, Adam.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying. My experience is I'm using an iMac, an
iMac. Okay.
Computer.
Yeah.
I have to go down on the sidebar to where there is the Gmail or the iCloud icon. It's not going to, that special thing is not going to show up at the top where I normally have inbox and sent and draft and trash. Is that correct?
So in Apple Mail, let me bring up Mail here on my computer. When you look in the sidebar in Apple Mail, there will be a mailboxes list at the top, and that will list all your accounts. And then below that, there's a number of things. You'll get reminders and smart mailboxes and on my Mac and stuff like that. But below all that stuff, you will get a list of mailboxes for each of the IMAP each of the IMAP accounts.
Thank you. That's what I thought, but you confirmed.
We have two more questions, Charlie.
Does the same apply in Hotmail?
Is in the inboxes area, for instance, if you have an iCloud account, if you control or right click on that, you'll get a pop-up menu and you can say synchronize iCloud. And so it's possible sometimes that Apple Mail will not have caught up with the server at the exact moment that you want it to. And so if you're ever concerned that things may not be in sync, you can always control or right click and say synchronize. And that's a way to make sure that everything is in sync, and the right number of mailboxes show up and all the new messages are there and that sort of thing. Okay, other questions?
Yeah, one more.
Monday, everything was working fine on both my iMac and my iPad. Tuesday, I could not send a message on either one of them. Today, I can send it on my iMac, but not on my iPad.
What email service are you using?
Safari and Apple.
And no, but what's your email address? Is it a mac.com or is it Gmail? Or that what sort of email service are you talking?
Mac.com.
Mac.com. So usually the reason why this sort of thing happens is that you can there's something called an SMTP server, stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, and that's what is used to handle your outgoing messages, the messages you're pushing out to the world. Now, it's possible that if you have set this up a long time ago, that you actually have um, some old information in there. And I ran into this because I hadn't changed my account setup in Apple Mail for years and years and years, and I've switched to iCloud, and so it was mostly working, but not 100% reliably. And I will paste this into the chat for George to see. There's a link to the server information that you need to have in Apple Mail. And so if you in Mail, if you go to Mail Preferences Accounts, and then you can see if you've got the right server information there. Um, it has changed a little bit from when it was MobileMe to now that it's iCloud. It's a little bit different, and it's possible those old servers are not working as reliably. So worth a try. There can be various other issues, but that's the most common one. The other one that you'll sometimes run into is if you're out and about, so you're on you're on a hotspot network somewhere, they may actually have locked things in such a way that you're not allowed to send mail. Doesn't happen too often anymore, but for a long time that was pretty common. But if you're at your house and normally everything works, that's not likely to be the problem. It's usually just having old servers that are not quite up to date. Okay, any
We have
other
one more
email?
question here.
Excuse me, Mr. Engst, it's not about email. I downloaded Printopia. I paid $19.99 and I can't find it anywhere on my iPad or my iMac.
Okay, so Printopia is a wonderful little app. I was going to mention this later in uh, a different context. Um, if you have bought it, do you if you should have probably an email receipt or something that gives you a registration code.
I do.
So if you go back to the Printopia homepage over here, which I will again send to George, over on the right-hand side, there's a download button, and it will download it again. And if you're using Safari, when you download something, um, you will usually show up in the downloads folder in your home folder. It's the most common location. Sometimes things can also get reset so that it will show up on the desktop, but then you probably would have noticed. So those are the two most common places to look.
Thank you.
The other question is, are you using Lion or Snow Leopard?
Lion. Yeah.
Lion. Okay. So in Safari in Lion, over on the right-hand side of the window is kind of a little arrowy thing, and that's what you have to click to see the downloads.
Well, I watched
And
the
so
UI in there.
you should be able to, I think there's a little magnifying glass next to it that will show you, will like reveal it in the Finder.
Right. It did.
Good. Okay.
But shouldn't
So
there
that's
be an icon where when I needed to print? Uh,
Yeah, what Printopia does is it uh, it registers, it does something so that printers connected to your Mac or that you use with your Mac, you'll be able to print to them from an iPhone or an iPad. And it does that by registering as something called AirPrint. AirPrint is the technology that Apple uses to allow iOS devices to print. And so new printers, I'll just get to this because someone else asked what printer should I buy to use with my iPad. You want to find something that is an AirPrint compatible printer if you're buying a new one. But if you don't want to buy a new one because you've got a perfectly good printer already, AirPrint you can basically turn that on by using Printopia, and it's a very neat little app. And people who want to print from the iPad, I recommend it highly.
Thank you.
Okay, let me switch back to here. We've got another. This is kind of a big question from Nancy from Susan Ridenour. Um, Susan writes, I have an iPad 2, an iPhone 4S, and a Dell laptop. I also have an AOL email account, which works fine, and a Google account that stores my contacts and calendar, and that's syncing with the iPhone and iPad. However, I have double entries when I sync with my car Bluetooth. And when I enter a contact in my iPhone, it does sync to the iPad, but does not sync to the Google account. When I look at a contact on my iPad to edit it, it shows that there are two entries. I think I need to turn something off, but don't know what it should be, if it should be iCloud or what. And she says that I had iCloud turned off at one point and I lost my notes and reminders. So what is almost certainly happening here is, Susan, is that you're duplicating information between iCloud and Google. And this is a little bit tricky. I shouldn't say a little bit. This can be a lot tricky because the problem is that sometimes you want to have iCloud calendars for certain reasons and Google calendars for other reasons, and you want them both to sync to the iPad and the iPhone. And similarly, you may end up with contacts in both places that you want to bring in. And honestly, this is hard. um, Apple wants to make it easy by saying focus on iCloud, which is all fine and dandy, except that, for instance, the Runners Club that I belong to has a Google Calendar where they have published all their races, and I want to subscribe to that Google Calendar on my iOS devices. And so setting all this up can be a real bear. The main thing is, though, to try to segregate everything. So your contacts and your calendar, for instance, are only in iCloud. And then if you have calendars that you need to share with other people who don't have, who can't use iCloud for one reason or who use Google, that kind of thing, then you need to sync those in separately and make sure you're always adding events and contacts to the right places. So I wish there was sort of a good way to say, oh, do this and everything will be better. But unfortunately, what usually happens in these situations is someone has to sit down and kind of shuffle through all the possibilities and say, okay, we've got these calendars and contacts from Google, we've got these ones from iCloud. We're going to make sure that they don't intersect. Um, one of one of the books, if you need to do this yourself, that we have that can help this is my wife's book, Take Control of Your iPad, and she has a big section on syncing stuff, so that can help provide some information there. It may also be something where if there's someone in the group who has figured this out and has got a relatively complicated syncing setup working, maybe sit down with them and see what they know. While I'm here, this is also, I just wanted to show you, this is the book that we have about mail. Take control of mail on your iPad, iPhone, and iPod Touch. And that's got a ton of information about mail specifically, but not about calendar and contact syncing. So sorry I can't provide a really solid answer there because it's just one of those things where you have to see it in situ to be able to really know what to do. Does that answer the question as best I can, I hope?
I think so. Marilyn?
This is not really an iPad question, but it has to do with double contacts. On my Mac, I just went onto iCloud recently, and when I go to all contacts, I get doubles on my Mac because iCloud has put itself there twice.
Right.
If I go into iCloud contacts, I don't get the doubles.
Yeah.
So if you go to all contacts, no matter, if you have different accounts and the same thing, I guess you would get doubles, whereas if you just go to iCloud contacts or Google contacts, you may not get that.
Now, are you using Address Book? This is an Address Book on a Mac?
Yes.
And is it Snow Leopard or Lion?
A Lion.
Okay. I'm running Snow Leopard on my Mac Pro and Lion on my MacBook here, so I have to look over to other machines. There is let's see there.
You have a choice of all contacts or iCloud contacts.
Right.
So if I go to iCloud contacts, I just get my regular contacts. If I go into all contacts, I get doubles because I have two sets of iCloud contacts for whatever reason I don't know on the iMac.
And what I want to verify before I answer here is that Address Book it's possible I can see two things having happened. One is that you may have ended up with a set of contacts that is local on your computer, and a set of contacts that is in iCloud and is being shared with your iOS devices as well. Um, and so that's one possibility. The other one is, yeah. So yeah, when you go into, I can actually show you this a little bit. When you go into, address book and you kind of go up to the highest level, you see all contacts and it says iCloud. If you're seeing another set there, that might be the problem. The other thing you can do is, if you look in the menu here, in the card menu, there's a look for duplicates command.
Right.
And so one thing that's common, unfortunately, with Address Book, and particularly the syncing solutions in MobileMe and with iCloud a little bit less so now, is that you can get, if there's a communication error, you can get just duplicates. Where it's the same card. For some reason, they got replicated because, oh, this one updated slightly here and updated slightly here, and someone in the middle didn't know what to do, so you got both copies. And so if you use that look for duplicates command, that can also go through and say, yeah, you have all these duplicates. Which one do you want to keep, the left one or the right one, or do you want to merge them?
Now,
And so,
the problem seems to be that if I go to iCloud contacts, I have no problem.
right.
If I go to all contacts, I see it twice. But what I'm saying in that left bar, I have iCloud contacts twice. I have two sets of iCloud contacts.
And both under sort of an iCloud, there's all contacts, and then there's an iCloud
Yes.
heading, and then there's two all iCloud contacts.
There's all contacts, then there's iCloud contacts, and then all the subsets under that, like the groups or whatever. Then another iCloud contacts underneath that with the same set of groups.
You don't have two iCloud accounts, do you?
No. And it doesn't show up in the iOS devices. It only shows up on that. I mean, I can manage it just by going into iCloud contacts. I just didn't know if, I was just trying to make the point that if you go to all contacts,
Right.
you have
So,
more than one group on, more than one set on there, you're going to get doubles.
So if you go to address book preferences and then go to accounts, it would be interesting to make sure that there's only one iCloud account there
Okay,
for
I'll
one.
check that. Thank you.
That that and then there's also the on my Mac account, and you can play with this stuff a little bit. What I would recommend is there's a command in the file menu for address book to make a backup. And I would make a backup before you do any kind of playing around because it can get quite confusing. The most important thing to remember with iCloud is that, sort of like IMAP, the truth is in the cloud. This you can make changes locally, but the kind of the master copy always resides up in the cloud. And so what you do on any given device is going to go up to the cloud and then back down to everyone else. And so that you can sometimes end up with weird combinations because of that, not realizing that. But in any event, so yeah, check your accounts and check the look for duplicates and just see what those pop up with.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see. Okay, I have a question here. Someone who's not going to be who's not at the meeting, I guess, but would like to talk about the top 3 troubleshooting actions to take if the iPad is not functioning properly. It's locked up, or apps are crashing, or mail's not working, things like that. I mean, as always with these kinds of things, it's hard to know exactly what to recommend without knowing a specific situation. But let's just say it's acting weird. You don't know exactly why, but it's being funny. You tap on an icon and the app sort of opens and then it goes black and you're back to the home screen, or, it's not swiping properly, things like that. It's just being weird. The first thing you want to try is powering it down. And to power an iPad down, you just push the sleep wake button up here in the top right, or top right, and hold it down for a few seconds until you get the screen that says slide to power off. And you can slide to power off, or you can cancel, which I just did. When you slide to power off, it'll take a few seconds to literally shut down, and then you press that sleep wake button again and hold it down briefly to power it back up. This is exactly like turning a Mac off using the shutdown, Apple shutdown menu, and then turning it back on. Um, One thing that we don't quite realize about iPads and iPhones and iPod touches is that they really are computers and they really are running a version of OS 10. I mean, iOS is basically the same operating system as Mac OS 10 under the hood. And as I think probably most of you have experienced over the years, sometimes it's useful to just shut the thing off and start over. And when you just put an iPad or an iPhone to sleep, or the screen goes black, it's just like sleep on the Mac. It's not getting that nice restart. Every now and then, it doesn't hurt to restart things. And my experience is that if you're experiencing any weirdness, that's your first thing to try. It takes 2 minutes. It's not hard. Can't hurt anything at all. And so it just gives you sort of a clean lease on life for the operating system. Now, if you have more significant problems and they're continuing, what it's sort of you're experiencing something weird and it just keeps happening. And again, it's something that's, I would say, general to the operating system. So it's not just one app that's being problematic. If something's a problem with just one app, usually it's that app's problem. Might be a bug with the app. You might try deleting it. If you hold down on the you hold down on the home button for a few seconds. Come on, guys. Come on. Oh, I'm sorry, not home button. You tap and hold on an icon. All the apps start wiggling and kind of jumping around with the little X in the corner. And if you tap that X, you can delete the app from your iPad, and that will delete the app and all its data, and then you can resync it back from iTunes or re-download it from the App Store if you need to. And so that can kind of clean up problems in a specific app. If you have more general problems, though, you might want to restore from backup. And you can do that by connecting the iPad to your Mac or PC and using iTunes. When it's connected, you go to the summary screen in iTunes for that device. You'll have an option to restore, and that just erases the iPad, and restores all your stuff. Um, it can take quite a while because it has to resync everything again, but it's not destructive. And then the last sort of troubleshooting technique, and this is one you really shouldn't need to use unless the device is acting really, really strange, like the battery life is, 30 minutes, or everything is just absolutely everything is just crashing and the other techniques haven't worked. You can do what's called a DFU, or device firmware update. And what that does is it actually reinstalls a new version of the device firmware. That's a little bit trickier. You can find instructions for doing it on the Apple site. Basically, you're holding down the home here and sleep button up here buttons for 10 seconds, and then you release the sleep button, and then keep holding the home button. And iTunes will say, I've noticed that you've put the iPad in recovery mode. Would you like me to reinstall absolutely everything? And again, that can take quite a long time to do, so you don't want to do it willy-nilly, but occasionally, it will be the thing that, a support technician will recommend. So, you know, uh, honestly, I've only done a device firmware update once in all the time I've had all my iOS devices, and it turned out not to help anything, so it wasn't the problem. Uh, you shouldn't need to do much more than restart the device by powering it down or sometimes deleting an app and reinstalling it. So, okay, any other questions about troubleshooting these guys?
Yes, couple here.
Yeah.
Once you download an app, say one that you've paid for, if you decide to delete it from your iPad, Do you forever have the rights to re-download it from the App Store?
The answer is yes, actually, you do. And this is both good and bad. So you download an app and you delete it from your iPad because, I mean, here's a good example. Let's say you're going on a trip to Washington, D.C., and you want the Smithsonian app. It's a good app, helps you with hours and directions and all the museums and all that. Um, but then you go home and you don't want the Smithsonian app cluttering your iPad for the rest of time until you go back to Washington. So you can delete it, and have it be gone from your iPad and not taking up space on your home screen, and then you can go get it again, from the App Store. Now, this works with free apps and paid apps, and you don't have to pay again or anything like that. That's good in a lot of ways. But here's the problem. Let's say you go on a trip to Washington, D.C., and you download a transit map app that turns out to be terrible. It's just awful. Maybe it's a free app, and you just want to get rid of it. You can't. I mean, you can delete it from your iPad, and you can delete it from your copy of iTunes on your Mac, but Apple will always know in the App Store that you downloaded that app, and you cannot, as far as anyone has been able to determine at this point, say erase this app from my account in every possible way. So, I said it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because it's so easy to try apps, particularly the free ones, that you often end up with a bunch of them that frankly they weren't any good, you don't want, and you can't actually get rid of.
Any other questions? Yes?
Is there a rule of thumb for how often you ought to back up an iDevice?
Is there a rule of thumb for how often you ought to back up an iDevice? The Honestly, what I recommend, eh, well, put it this way. You shouldn't have to think about it. That's one of the basic tenets of iOS. So there are two basic ways to back up an iOS device. One is when you connect it, there's two backup ways actually. There's iTunes backups, which back up to your computer, and then there's iCloud backups, which go up to the cloud. Um, when you attach a computer or an iPad that's using iTunes backups to your computer, it backs up, not optional. So that's good. And because you need to attach the iPad to your computer to sync relatively frequently or to charge or whatnot, it's easy to back up frequently then. With iCloud backups, you have to attach your iPad to power. So if you have just a power jack somewhere in your house that's not attached to a computer, as soon as you do that and you have iCloud backups turned on, it will back up to iCloud up once per day. It doesn't do it multiple times per day. So this used to be pretty easy because you had to plug into your computer a lot, and then Apple added the iCloud one, which is nice and automated. The problem is that they also added Wi-Fi sync, so it's easy, for instance, to go without um, uh, connecting to your computer. Oh wait, Wi-Fi sync? Wi-Fi sync does a backup. I'm sorry, I'm confused. The answer is whenever you plug into power, something's going to back up as long as your computer is turned on if you're using iTunes backups. So you really can't avoid it. I mean, you're going to need power pretty soon. And what I usually recommend is that you have a particular spot in your house where you plug in, and where the iPad lives when you're not using it and getting charged. So as long as you do that on a regular basis and you leave your computer on if you're backing up to iTunes or if you've got iCloud set up, you're going to be backing up once a day, and there's no reason to really back up more than that, generally speaking. If you were really concerned about it, that you'd just done something really important and you'd be absolutely devastated if you lost it. Um, let's see, that's not the one that has iCloud turned on. I think you can force an iCloud backup. And settings, iCloud, storage and backup. Yes, if you go into the settings, into the iCloud settings, you can see that there's down here there's a backup now button. So you could force an iCloud backup if for some reason you knew you'd done something important and you really didn't. Yeah, you didn't want to be able to wait. You didn't want to wait for the next iCloud backup to happen. Similarly, if you're doing Wi-Fi sync, let's see, general iTunes Wi-Fi sync. Again, in the general, you can see iTunes Wi-Fi sync. You can do a sync now, and all that requires is that your computer be turned on. So that will get back up that way.
Don?
Anyone else?
Two questions. First, you said you still have Snow Leopard on your Mac Pro. Am I correct in assuming that's because you needed to cover that in your writings and not?
Oh yes, that's exactly my reason. I absolutely need it to cover it.
Okay.
And I'm lazy.
Okay. And secondly, okay, let's say you and your wife each have a different, you each have an iPad, but you don't want
Yes.
to have the same bookmarks and contacts and all that. So you each have a separate iTunes account. But suppose you've bought an app that she would like. Is there any way for her to, when she goes to sign in, it has her iTunes account and wants her password. Is there any way to sign her out and sign you in so you can download the thing that you paid for onto her iDevice?
The answer is yes. However, we've actually found, I think it bothers Tanya more than it bothers me. Um, there are a couple of ways of having sharing apps that you buy within a household. That's not the problem. The problem is that whenever that app gets updated or needs to be reinstalled or anything along those lines, if you've given her an account, she will be prompted for your password, which is just sort of annoying on every time you update your apps. You're asked for your password, and then it asks you for your spouse's password too, and you don't really know why. It's not very good about telling you that, why this has happened. So that's the annoying part. The mechanics of it. The easiest way to do it, I believe, I haven't done this in a while, is if you go into, let's see, where do they put these things? Music, iTunes,
Store.
mobile applications.
You're saying,
Yeah, so if you,
somebody's saying store.
You're talking about on your Mac?
I'm talking about on your Mac.
Oh, okay.
So basically, from my perspective, sort of one of the easiest ways to do this is to just copy the file. All of these apps, all iOS apps live on your Mac in a mobile applications folder in the iTunes folder, and so that can be a way of doing it. I wonder if Tanya says something about this in her iPad book. That's the way we've done it. It's possible there are others. Let's see.
Okay, so you've answered my question, I think. You have to do it on your Mac and not on your iDevice.
I think so. I'm just looking here to see if there's another way. It's manage apps, update apps, share apps. Here we go. The other thing you can do is there's and Tanya covers this and take control of your iPad. There's a home sharing feature built into iTunes that that lets you share apps as well. And she has full instructions for doing that. She sort of prefers that to the method that I was suggested in terms of copying the files back and forth. So yeah, it's we're sort of looking at these instructions. Actually, here we go. I can send George a link that explains home sharing. Honestly, I find home sharing to be really quite confusing. I think it's poorly done. So but it is a way that Apple has provided to us to be able to share purchased media between iTunes accounts within a household. So that's going to be the official way to do it. My way is the unofficial way.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. if you are going to, in backups, is it an either or principle, either backup to your computer via iTunes or iCloud, or can you use both? And if you use both, might you wind up getting duplicates?
Is it an either or situation with backups? I believe it is, and well, it is an either or situation at any given time. So you can turn iCloud backup off and on, and then you could turn it off and back up to your computer, and then turn it on and back up to iCloud. I'm not certain there's any benefit to doing that. The only I'm trying to think if there's any scenarios where one backup would work better than another. I mean, the only one that I can think of is that it's conceivable that you could be traveling in a situation where you don't have your computer and would need to restore from backup, the iCloud backup. The only problem with that is that you would still need to sync all of your media from your Mac. So let's say you're on vacation, you've only taken your iPad, something bad happens such that you have to restore, you have to reset the iPad and restore it, which you can do on the iPad. You can download everything from iCloud. You'd still need access to Wi-Fi. You can't do it over 3G or 4G. And you could that would get you your iPad working again, but you'd have to download apps manually, and you could download purchased music and purchased movies and videos manually. But photos and anything that was synced, any music that was synced from your computer wouldn't appear there. So I guess that's the slight benefit of iCloud backup. Um, it's possible that an iTunes backup would be somewhat faster to restore because it wouldn't be happening over Wi-Fi. So honestly, I don't have a good feel for it. Some of our iPads back up locally, and some of them back up to iCloud, mostly for testing purposes. And I've never really noticed a big difference in how functional that makes them.
In that context, it might be confusing at sync versus backup. Sync, whereas you're syncing current information, whereas backup, you're backing up an entire device. Syncing, you might wind up with duplicates if you were syncing to the iCloud one time to your iTunes via your computer another time. Might you not wind up with duplicates?
This is actually a good point. And what it's important to realize, sync and backup are two completely separate actions in iOS, and they do different complementary things. So when you back up, iCloud backup, for instance, it actually says automatically back up your camera roll, accounts, documents, and settings when this iPad is plugged in, locked, and connected to Wi-Fi. So let's say you have been syncing your music from iTunes to your iPad. That is not backed up. So backup holds one set of things, the sync transfers another set of things, and together they make up the complete contents of your iPad. And so that it's an important thing to realize that the backup is necessary and protects a lot, some of the data on the iPad. It is not all of the data on your iPad, because some of the data on your iPad comes from syncing. And so that is something that's quite different than certainly on the Mac or on PCs, where you would think of a backup as being everything, and you might sync some stuff separately. So yeah, sync and backup separate, combined to be the whole.
Okay, continue.
Let me see what I got. See what else I've got in this document here. All right. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, Mitch's iPad asks, comment on top improvements in iOS 6. Well, I mean, the problem with this is that there's big things and there's little things. So little things, maybe it's just me, and I don't think I have particularly big hands, but my fat fingers, I'm constantly hitting in the music app. You know how you have to tap to play and pause. I'm constantly hitting the left and right buttons to either side, which scroll me to the beginning or the end of whatever track or podcast I'm playing, which drives me up the wall. I'd like to see some better user interface, and some of apps have pencil-thin fingers. Um, Another thing that I'm running into on my iOS devices, and this is actually not iOS specific as a cloud, is that let's say I have a nice reminder set to tell me that I need to come talk to you folks at 11:30 a.m. on Wednesday. If I set that reminder, I am now alerted on just within sight. One, two, three, four, five devices. I mean, it's a little ridiculous to have every device in my office suddenly go, "You got a meeting? You got a meeting!" I'm like, "Yes, I know. Okay, back off. One of you's enough." Um, there is some thought that Apple will be improving this in Mountain Lion. Hopefully, they will be improving in iOS 6 as well. It's just a little ridiculous. You kind of want one device to say, "Yeah, I'm the primary one right now," And I mean, you could imagine all sorts of cool ways they could do it. I somehow doubt they will, but have your iPhone be the primary device. As long as sort of it knows that it's in your pocket or with you, and all sorts of things that you could do. But um, another thing that I think I would really like to see in iOS 6, I hope for this, is that I frankly think the home screen, what's called Springboard, kind of the the parlance, the big grid of icons. I think it's really pretty horrible once you get beyond a certain number of apps. At this point, I cannot tell you where most of my apps are. I have to use Spotlight search to find them. So if you slide to the side here, you can search for an app. Uh, and frankly, that's how I get to a whole lot of my apps, which is a little embarrassing. That I mean, I'm an edge case in the sense that developers send me apps to review, so I have hundreds of apps. But at the same time, there's so many apps out there, and so many of them are free or really, really cheap. It's not that uncommon to have 100 apps anymore. I mean, it's not that big a deal. And so I think that Apple really needs to do something to improve navigation and accessibility of apps. One thing that Android does that I think is a really good idea, frankly, is that your home screens in Android don't have to just hold apps. In iOS, all you get is that grid. You can have a folder. That's it. That's the only thing that's unusual. Whereas in Android, you can actually have widgets that appear on those home screens. So you could have a weather widget or a little ticker that shows you your incoming mail or something like that, where you don't have to go into an app to see something. I don't hold out a lot of hope for Apple doing that because it feels like a major their entire concept, which is that as soon as you run an app, you go from the iPad like this to suddenly I tap an icon and it becomes a weather machine. This is WeatherBug, which I love. Um, and look, there's only a small amount of rain near us. So that's the big thing with iOS that I don't think Apple's going to change. But I would like to see them do so. Other than that, honestly, I don't get too wrapped up um, in speculating or wishing for things or whatnot because in my experience, Apple is going to do what Apple is going to do, and people's opinions have relatively little effect on that. So uh, it's a good way to set yourself up for disappointment when you're like, oh, I really hope they do this. I really hope they do this, and they're not going to. So I, I lead a busy life. What comes will come, and so I don't stress too much about that. That said, are there any really big things you'd really like to see in iOS 6? Are there things that you find troublesome?
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure it's an iOS problem. It's being able to delete email from all devices at once.
Being able to delete email from all devices at once?
Right.
If you're using IMAP, that should be true. That's all. That's just again the way it works. If you delete a message and use it in your IMAP account, then it will disappear from all the rest of them. Or realistically, what it will do is it will go into the trash mailbox on all of them, and then you can empty the trash mailbox from one of them.
That's a function of the server though, right?
Yes, but all the IMAP clients that you're using on the iPad and the Mac and wherever else are just looking at that server. So that's why when you delete a message and it puts it into the trash mailbox, and then you empty trash, should go away from everything.
Doesn't it Hotmail?
And if that's not happening, you might make sure that you really are using IMAP. So that can be a problem. The other concern, if you're not using a sort of a standard IMAP, there are some older, weirder IMAP implementations or clients that did something. What was it called? Expunge, maybe? Maybe they had to do expunge. They actually just when you deleted a message, they just actually hid it. They didn't move it to a trash mailbox. They would just sort of hide it, and that was considered to be really quite confusing. But it's possible that's what you're still seeing.
Charlie.
In Hotmail, when you do it on the iPad, you can read it and you can trash it. Go back to your computer, it's still there, but it's now been read. It shows it, instead of being bold, it's no longer bold. It shows you read it, but it still sits there. And you can still use it.
Not really hearing this one, sorry.
You said in Hotmail that does not occur.
It doesn't delete it.
It doesn't delete it on all of his devices.
I'm very surprised by that. Hotmail certainly should be entirely IMAP and web based. Um, then again, it's Microsoft. Who knows? Sorry, cheap shot.
Okay. There was another question? Yes, sir.
How can you take 100 emails, delete them all at once?
Ooh, 100 emails and delete them all at once. That's a good question. I would certainly refer you to Joe's book. Let me look here. One of my dirty little secrets is I actually don't use the Mail app on the iPad. I'm not that fond of it, and so I don't get into that very much.
Any
I
device,
believe.
actually, even on the iMac.
Um,
No, in the iMac, it's very simple.
right, you just select them.
Just select them,
Just
select all,
shift click. Yeah,
delete.
just shift click. Okay, so here we go. In the Mail app on the iPad, so you've got your if you hold it, and one of the things that may not be clear is when you switch the view, different things happen. And so the easiest way to look at these is in landscape mode, because when it's horizontal like this, because then you get this sidebar that shows all the time. If you're in this mode, you have to tap inbox up here to get it, and so it may not be quite as clear. But either way, there's an edit button in the upper right here of that little sidebar, and when you tap it, then you get all of these little buttons you can click on the left side, and once you've selected them, then there's a delete button down here at the bottom, this red button down here. So that would allow you. I mean, 100 might still
I
be a
understand
little bit.
that, but is there one way you can tap the top one and then tap the bottom one and get them all?
No,
So you have
not in iOS. They don't have the, because it's sort of this. It's in fact it's a problem in iOS with a touch device is determining range is tricky.
Right.
Because you can't select one. I mean, there's ways of doing it, but it's not a common thing in iOS. So, but again, it's IMAP. You could just do it on your Mac where it's easy.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes when I highlight those, I touch those dots to delete. Then on the
Yeah.
bottom, instead of saying delete, it says archive. I don't know what the heck that is.
Are you using Gmail?
Yeah,
Yeah. So, um,
it's one of the three I use.
right. So Gmail is a little different than many of the other services. It's not really an IMAP server. Gmail is meant to be viewed on the web, and so they sort of bolted on the IMAP stuff on the side so that you could read it in other clients. And I use Gmail. I love Gmail. But one of the things that's very unusual about Gmail is that it doesn't really do mailboxes at all. And so what it does instead are labels. And so when something is in your your inbox, all that really means it has the inbox label applied to it. And unlike normal IMAP, you can have multiple labels assigned to something. So, for instance, I have a label for Tidbits Talk, which is a mailing list that I run. I have a label for the various running club mailing lists that I'm on, and things like that. And those so I can have a message that is, in my inbox and in the mailing list, it has my inbox label and it has my mailing list, my running club mailing list label. And so people honestly didn't really understand this. And so what they wanted was a way to say, how can I make my inbox empty? And so what Gmail provides as an answer to this is this archive concept. And what archive means is take all the labels off, which is a little silly in some ways. I mean, it doesn't really do anything. But what it has the effect of doing visually is it takes it removes things from your inbox if you're viewing it on another client. So archive is basically saying, I don't want to throw this message out, but I do want it to disappear from my inbox. And so in Gmail, if you wanted to actually delete things, you would move them to the trash mailbox. I'm not certain why it's. Let me just take a look here at mine. Yeah, I don't know why it would be saying that specifically, because I'm using Gmail here too, and I'm not getting the archive. But certainly, if you tap, select a couple of messages and then tap move, you can say, move and then move to trash, which will do the same thing. So so in any event, so that should answer that. But realistically, unless you only have an iPad or your computer is not nearly as capable as your iPad, I would, encourage, more significant manipulation. Do that on your Mac, or do that on your computer. Personally, what I do, um, I believe that spending a lot of time manipulating mail is trying to recreate the 1950s office. Where you have an inbox and you have an outbox and you have a big filing cabinet and everything has to be moved from one to the other. It's a lot of make work. It's not the way we think now, and that's not the way Gmail was designed. So Gmail, basically everything is a search. Your inbox is really just a search for all the messages that have the label inbox. And so anything that you have in Gmail, you can search for just like you would anything else in Google. And so it's a very, very fast and easy way to do things. So what I in fact use is the Gmail app on my iPhones and iPads, which frankly just looks like web client scaled down to a mobile version. And it's smoother and faster for the way I tend to work. But then again, I'm using a web interface to Gmail on my Mac as well, so that's what I'm more used to.
Jerry, did you have a question?
A comment, Adam. In the settings for mail, in settings and then mail, and if you pick your Gmail account, down at the bottom there's choices to whether you archive or not archive the message. And if you pick the archive off, then you will get the delete at the bottom as archive.
Got it. So yeah, so it sounds like so for people who are using the mail, the settings will let you switch between archiving and deleting then. So good.
Thank you.
All right.
About that, we were talking earlier about saving an email to a mailbox.
Yes.
You just showed moving it to a mailbox, and then you can also use that little folder icon up on top of the mail client to send it to a mailbox.
Yes.
Is there any preference between one way or the other?
You would use the little icon at the top if you're doing it with message that you're reading. You'd use the move button if you wanted to move multiple messages.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, really. But if you're just doing one message, it's probably more work to tap it in the tap edit, tap select, tap move, tap the mailbox. Whereas if that's just the message you want, you can just tap once there and tap the message. So it's half as many steps. So same effect though.
Okay.
Okay. Well, here's another question that changing topic slightly. Can podcasts be updated from the iPad, or will they need to be downloaded and transferred from the host computer? This is actually a little bit of a confusing one. I had to look this up. The answer is that you can download podcasts manually. If you go into the iTunes app, let's see if I can find that. If you go into the iTunes app, you can go to podcasts. Okay, there we go. And you can go to podcasts and you can find one. Here's an NPR radio show, and you'll notice there's over here that there's a free button. That's basically the download button. And so if there's multiple episodes, you can download them manually that way. So it works fine for downloading and listening to things one at a time, or a couple at a time, but you cannot do what's possible to do on iTunes, which is subscribe to a podcast. You say, I want to listen to the Car Talk every time a new episode comes out, so why don't you just go get them? And so for that, you need to use iTunes on the Mac and the PC. And my other thing I will say is that my experience is that when you download things manually and then you sync, depending on your sync settings, they may get the stuff you downloaded manually may end up being deleted. So it's really best to handle podcasts entirely on your computer, and then just listen to them on the iPad, the iPhone. That make sense?
Yes.
Good. Any other podcast or music related questions?
Nope.
Okay. So here's one about Bluetooth. Can you use any Bluetooth keyboard with the iPad or just the Apple one? And what about other Bluetooth devices like mice? Keyboards, you should be able to use any Bluetooth keyboard. There are certainly lots of iPad-specific Bluetooth keyboards, and if you have a particularly big, computer Bluetooth keyboard that you like a lot, you should be able to pair that with your iPad as well. Other Bluetooth devices are trickier. Basically, they have to be supported, and there are not many devices that are Bluetooth devices supported. Pretty much only headphones and speakers. And so with those, again, you can just pair them pretty easily. There will always be instructions with a device on how to do it. But mice, no. If you think about it, what would a mouse do on an iPad? Where's the cursor? There's nothing for it to do. The iPad is a touch-based system, and it is expecting your finger to come down on that screen, and a mouse has no role in that world. So what it really comes down to is, keyboards, yes; headphones, speakers, yes; pretty much everything else, no. And actually, the one other thing you can get into with some of that is you can share an internet connection. This will kind of lead into my next question. You can share an internet connection via Bluetooth with other devices. And so the question was, can my iPhone 4 or iPad 2 on AT&T act as a wireless hotspot for my MacBook Air? And the answer is yes and no, because the iPhone 4S can, the iPad 2 cannot. The third generation iPad, the iPad 3, can act as a personal hotspot, but only if you use Verizon. And it's actually a really good deal with Verizon, because Verizon does not charge you extra for a tethering plan the way AT&T does with the iPhone. So this is unfortunately confusing, but what it really comes down to is the iPhone can do it, and the iPad 3 can do it with Verizon. So, and you will have to pay more if you're using an iPhone, which I frankly find a little egregious. I think that you're already paying for data. Data is data. You shouldn't have to pay more for data that you're pushing off to another computer or accessing via another computer. the Verizon iPad 3 with tethering, actually we've used it a few times now for that. It works really quite well. It's a nice little system. The only thing is you feel a little silly sometimes, bringing your iPad around so that you can use your MacBook. It's a little bit large to be carrying around purely as a hotspot, especially when you also have the iPhone in your pocket. But I'd rather not pay AT&T an extra $20 a month just so I can use tethering every now and then. Okay, here's a question. What is the best screen protector for the iPad? I don't know who asked this, but my question back to you is, what's your goal in terms of protecting the screen? Do we know who asked
Sure, where
this?
that question came from. What would be your goal? Anybody have an answer to that?
Keep it from getting scratched.
Keep it from getting scratched. Scratch, probably.
Okay. Scratch. Okay. So yeah, the reason I asked is because there are different levels of protection for the screen. You can go from Apple's smart cover, for instance. Um, and oh yeah, look at that. Speaking of iPads, looks like my wife's iPad 2 is just over here. And that one has the smart cover. Um, So the smart cover sort of acts as a screen protector for when, it's in your bag or something like that. It also, acts as a stand. I'm not a huge fan of it personally, um, but that does work. What many people think of, however, when they're talking about protecting the screen is protecting it from scratches. Um, is they're thinking about the films. You can get these clear, kind of static cling films that you can apply to the surface of the iPad. Um, I'm not quite sure, when I say when I said what the goal was, I'm not quite sure what the utility of these things is unless you are traveling with your iPad in such a way that you're tossing it in a bag where there's going to be keys and change and who knows what other hard metal objects. Uh, the simple fact of the matter is these things have very, very serious glass on them, and I've never actually seen a scratched iPad or iPhone screen. I'm sure it happens, but it's not that common if you just take reasonably good care of it. The device that I like here, I'll show you on iPad 1, is this is called it's from a company called Zero Chroma, and it's a stand that it has this thing that pops out and it rotates to all sorts of different angles and so on. But what's also neat about it is that it's meant to go on the back of the iPad normally, but you can also put it on the front of the iPad, and that gives you, if you're traveling and you're putting it in your bag, it gives you a hard plastic cover for the screen. So the only time that I've really worried about scratching the screen again is when I'm traveling and tossing it into a bag. So something like the Zero Chroma stand would be a really nice way to do that. I'm not sure if they have a model for the iPad 3. I'm not sure if they need a separate model for the iPad 3. They definitely it needs to be different for the iPad 2 because the iPad 1 is a little thicker. But there are hundreds, if not thousands, of iPad cases and protection devices and things like that out there. I wish I could sort of give you, oh, this is the best one of all time, but the fact is that, madness lies down that way. There's so many of them. You have to decide what kind of look and features you want and all that, and then try to narrow down the choices. The only person I know who might have an opinion that way is a guy named Marco Tabini, who writes the roundups of the new cases for Macworld. And he must have just boxes and boxes and boxes of them. But on the whole, I'm not a big fan of
Question.
cases. I mean, Apple
We
does
have one.
wonderful.
We have a question.
How
Yeah.
about to protect it from the glare if you're out on your lanai wanting to use your iPad?
The film, that is a good question, or a good point. You'd have to look into the films and make sure one was specifically an anti-glare film. Um, and it might make the screen look a little bit muddier inside. I don't know. Because they're just changing the refractive qualities of the screen a little bit. But yes, that is a good point. That if you're reading in the sun a lot or in bright light, that may cut down on the glossy look. I tend not to do that. I'm not a big fan of reading outside, so I don't run into that too much. But the other thing is when you're looking for these films, look for ones that they give you good installation instructions, because one of the things that I've heard people complain about with them is that it can be hard sometimes to get all the bubbles out or to get them aligned just perfectly, stuff like that. So that's going to be the main difference. I mean, all of these things are probably made by 3M, and I doubt there's a huge amount of difference between the different many of the different products. They're just going to be different people relabeling them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. What's the difference between 3G and 4G? 1. 4G, 1. The sad part is that's actually almost true. um, so you may have you may if you, for those of you who have gotten a new iPad 3 or who have an iPhone 4S may have noticed that in iOS 5.1, in the upper corner here, it now will say 4G sometimes. And there's this big question about what 4G really means. Um, Originally, some time ago, 4G was supposed to equate with a new wireless networking technology called LTE for long-term evolution. And the problem was that it was going to be LTE was going to be faster and more bandwidth, all sorts of great stuff. And indeed, the iPad 3 supports LTE. The problem is that the wireless carriers also um, somehow managed to browbeat the organization that's in charge of labeling for these things into agreeing that 4G could also mean some of the faster 3G technologies. What that really means is that when your iPhone or your iPad says 4G now, it is just getting faster 3G. And when it says, if it's an iPad 3, it will say LTE if it's really getting LTE. Um, it honestly, I think it's really troublesome. Apple is actually being sued in Australia for this because 4G is not 4G, and in Australia they don't have what 4G means that the iPad doesn't support. So it's a real mess. What it really comes down to though is if you see 4G, you'll probably be getting faster throughput, maybe. Um, One of the things that I discovered, I live in upstate New York in Ithaca, which is relatively rural, and the problem we have here is that we don't have great cell coverage. So it's pretty common for me to get 1 or 2 bars of cell coverage. And so we were in Washington D.C. for spring break, and boy, the cell coverage was great. We had 4 bars all the time. But when you had 4 bars, that didn't mean you'd have any actual data throughput. So, stuff was just mind-bogglingly slow. And I was really quite shocked at how slow it was, even though it claimed cell service was really good. So, you got to take all this stuff with a grain of salt. What you're really getting needs to be determined, or should I say, what you're really getting will vary with position regardless of what it reports. Okay, a couple more quick questions here. This is an easy one. Can you
All right,
install Adobe Flash?
just take one
Sorry.
more. Just take one more.
Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna do a couple because I got them really fast. Can you install Adobe Flash Player on the iPad 2? No. Adobe Flash does not run on the iPad, never will, and is going away. Don't get used to it. Is the new iPad, the iPad 3, unlocked for international use? The answer is yes, it is. So if you travel overseas, you should be able to get a micro SIM for another carrier, a 3G carrier. This person says, I own an iPad 1 and plan to purchase an iPad 3. Will I be able to sync my iBooks and Kindle books between the 2 iPads? The answer is yes, but you're not really syncing them between the 2 iPads. You're actually syncing them with iCloud or with the Amazon store and then back down to the other iPad. So the answer is simply yes, but that you're not going to do it in the way you think you're going to be doing it. And then finally, should I replace my original iPad with the iPad 3? It all depends what you want. The really big improvements are faster processor, way better screen, and potentially better 4G/LTE networking. My advice, if you had said iPad 2 to iPad 3, probably not worth the effort. But iPad 1 to iPad 3, you should look at the screen. Some people really, really, really like the screen and consider that to be worth the upgrade price. But there's not too many things. There's a few things that only run on the iPad 3, not too many. For the most part, the original iPad will continue to be useful for most of the stuff that you're used to using it for. So,
Well, Adam, thank you.
Got through them all. You're very welcome.
Thank you very, very much, and have a great day.
Yes, you too. And I hope if you have more mail questions, you can convince Joe Kissel to come and talk, because he's really the expert when it comes to all the mail stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, guys.
Same.
You too. Pinopia.
Printopia, yeah.
On my Mac,